Chosen a particularly lively day in the Senate for this, but we have a considerable number of committee members scheduled to attend. We're just finishing up our caucus conversation on dealing with the continuing resolution, so it was a pretty significant conversation. Let me call to order this spotlight hearing of the Democrats on the Senate Environment Public Works Committee. Today's gathering is entitled Freezing America's Progress. Its purpose is to raise the profile of the harms caused in communities across the United States from the illegal funding freezes and deep uncertainty about federal investment in our collective future. I'm deeply appreciative of the witnesses we have here today to discuss these harms and making it clear that these actions are illegal and violate the Constitution. We're now in week 8 of the second Trump administration. In just 2 months, we've seen attacks on the rule of law, willful disregard for the Constitution, a funding freeze that is threatening to kill jobs and drive up energy costs for families, and trauma inflicted on dedicated career staff at various agencies. The list goes on. By the way, trauma is not my word, it's the word of Russell Vought, who intended the trauma. Trump has created enough chaos to throw our economy into disarray and stoke fears of an impending recession. The Atlanta Federal Reserve just warned that we are facing a 2.5% drop in GDP this quarter, the worst economic slump our country has seen since the second quarter of 2020, when Trump was last in office. Across the country, communities are reeling as Trump and his unelected billionaire co-president Elon Musk have taken a chainsaw to infrastructure funding, money-saving clean energy investments, and anti-pollution programs, all to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. The chaos and destruction may seem random, but Trump will do what he always does: reward friends and punish enemies. Pausing funding for discretionary grant programs at the Department of Transportation, leverage to reward friendly governors and punish those he doesn't like. Killing clean energy projects so extreme as to include ripping out already installed electric vehicle charging stations and selling back the federal EV fleet at a loss of $1 billion taxpayer dollars. Payback for his oil and gas donors who will sell more oil and gas. And while the Trump administration rewards fossil fuel donors and guts climate safety investments, EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin's home in Suffolk County was on fire. On Long Island, fire season still has not officially started, but drought and dry conditions led to a brush fire over the weekend that burned 600 acres. With this chaos and destruction, Trump is violating legal contracts, trampling on the Constitution, ignoring the rule of law, and flouting court orders. We're here today to expose his destructive betrayal of the American people and to fight back. Today, we will hear more about the funding freezes, pauses, and attempted clawbacks at EPA and DOT, the legal lessons we can draw from this outrageous behavior, and the very real harms it is wreaking on American families and the economy. The targets of this wrath include programs for roads, bridges, light rail, and bike lanes, clean drinking water, home renovations that reduce household energy bills, flood mitigation projects, safer school buses, zero-emission vehicle charging stations, community centers where seniors and families can go during heat waves and dangerous storms, and money-saving clean energy projects, including solar and geothermal. In Rhode Island, the aging of our bridges is being exacerbated by climate change. Our Washington Bridge, a key artery, has been shut down for over a year. Small businesses on both sides of the span are suffering, and bottlenecked traffic causes misery for drivers. The project to replace the bridge was awarded grants from the MEGA and INFRA programs, but it is waiting still on both grants. The beautiful and historic Mount Hope Bridge requires upgrades to address the climate-driven corrosion of cables. It was awarded a grant from the PROTECT program that could extend the life of the bridge by up to 75 years and save hundreds of millions of dollars. But the grant agreements must be finalized to access the funds. 15 bridges on the I-95 corridor carrying 185,000 vehicles daily and billions of dollars worth of freight had a repair awarded funding from the Bridge Investment Program under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. But until the grant agreement is signed, there's no access to the funds. EPA initially froze all grant funds, including those already under contract and obligated, despite 2 federal courts ordering the administration to release funds. They even froze school bus rebates for buses already ordered and ready to be delivered. Companies made investments based on the obligation of this funding. They hired workers, they filled orders, they drew up plans. In the confusion, with funding so erratic and uncertain, contracts are defaulted, payroll is not made, jobs are lost, and local government budgets are strained. I call this disarray the fog bank, a fog of confusion, behind which the administration tries to violate court orders without a clear and specific act of contempt. I expect as litigation proceeds, we will discover this fog bank strategy was a calculated ploy. But court orders should be obeyed, not defeated through fog bank trickery. Then there's the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Almost a year ago, long before the election, EPA awarded $20 billion to fund community, clean energy, and disaster resilience activities across the country, like Hampton, Virginia, near many naval and Air Force installations, which plans to invest in infrastructure to reduce flood risk, or Lee County, Florida, which plans to build community centers to house residents during extreme weather events. The recipients range from the Virginia coal fields to small towns across Georgia and North Carolina, to Lane County, Oregon, and the city of Waco, Texas, and the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe in northern Minnesota. After much consultation, EPA contracted with Citibank to help grantees leverage billions more in private investment. One major award of nearly $7 billion of GGRF funding is expected to attract 2 to 3 times this amount in private investment for projects to lower utility bills, reduce air pollution, and make us less dependent on foreign oil cartels. But EPA feels obliged to Trump to terminate this already obligated, congressionally authorized funding that will lower household energy costs, spur economic development, and reduce pollution. So here's what it looks like. It looks like EPA schemed with the Department of Justice to pretend that there was fraud. The pretext was so bad that the criminal chief of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia actually resigned rather than enforce DOJ's politically motivated order. So the Trump U.S. Attorney pursued it himself. As a former U.S. Attorney, I can tell you that almost never happens. It is a weird signal. And the judge denied the application, which also almost never happens. The Department of Justice job going into the magistrate judge is to make sure that they have done it right so that we always get yes for an answer by virtue of doing the job right. This judge denied the application, another huge red flag. And the saga continued and continued, now with an unexplained and likely unpredicated FBI investigation. With Kash Patel in charge, it's hard to have much confidence that that's a legit investigation. And just last night, on the eve of a court hearing over Climate United's challenge to the freeze, EPA posts a video of Lee Zeldin claiming to cancel all $20 billion of the GGRF. Behind Trump's fog bank and pretexts, he and his unelected co-president Musk are simply stealing from the American people to pay for tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy. It is gangster government. So let me welcome our 4 participants. Our first is Professor Lisa Heinzeling, the Justice William J. Brennan Jr. Professor of Law at Georgetown Law. This is an especially fitting title for her since Professor Heinzeling clerked for Justice Brennan, as well as Judge Posner on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. If you don't know Professor Heinzeling, you know her work as the lead author on the plaintiff's briefs in the Massachusetts versus EPA litigation. That case, of course, established the proposition that greenhouse gases are pollutants under the Clean Air Act. Next is Mr. Kaylee Edgerly, President and CEO of Sunny Merriman Incorporated. Sunny Merriman is a commercial and school bus dealership that has been in business since 1967. In 2019, the Lynchburg, VA-based company made the decision to go in on electric buses, and it delivered its first electric school bus in 2020. Soon after, they hired Mr. Edgerly. This is just the latest chapter of his long career in the commercial vehicle space, starting at Detroit Diesel and more recently at Thomas Built Buses. Our third participant is Mr. Phil Aroniano. Got it? Mr. Aroniano has 20 years of experience in the climate and clean energy policy and finance sectors. Climate United is an investment fund formed by 3 experienced financial and community banking institutions. More than a year ago, EPA awarded Climate United nearly $7 billion in IRA funding to capitalize community investments across the country. Now, after the fact, Lee Zeldin is attempting to claw back the funds by throwing around baseless allegations of fraud, as I discussed. I will turn this over to my colleague from Maryland, who has arrived with exactly perfect timing, to introduce our final participant, the Honorable Calvin Ball, County Executive of Howard County, Maryland.
Perfect. Thank
Senator
you.
Alsovitz.
Thank you so much, Senator Whitehouse, for organizing today's important discussion. And I am so pleased to welcome my good friend, County Executive Calvin Ball, to the Senate today. Like me, Calvin is a proud, lifelong Marylander, and in 2006, he made history when he was elected the youngest chairperson of the Howard County Council. He also made history again in 2018 when he became the first African-American to be elected Howard County Executive. And last night, I was pleased to join County Executive Ball at a town hall in Howard County, and we heard from over 1,000 Marylanders about the devastating impacts of this administration's workforce reductions and funding freezes. The uncertainty and chaos is having a real negative consequence on the ground and in our state, and in every state across the country, red and blue alike. I am glad that we're taking the time to elevate local stories about the impacts, and want to say to our county executive, thank you so much for joining us here today.
And with that, let me begin with Professor Heinzerling.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. Anyone who has taken a high school civics class understands that the U.S. Constitution gives Congress alone the power to impose and collect taxes and to appropriate the collected funds for the purposes of its choosing. The power to raise and spend public money is one of Congress's most important prerogatives. Perhaps the most dramatic way in which the Trump administration is threatening to destabilize the long-settled structure of the federal government is through its usurpation of Congress's power of the purse. Several well-settled rules govern the president's decisions about spending federal money. First, once Congress appropriates money for specified purposes, the president may not refuse to spend that money just because he would rather not spend it. In a series of cases in the 1970s, prompted by President Richard Nixon's refusal to spend appropriated funds for various programs, federal courts declined to hold that the president has any inherent constitutional authority to refuse to spend or impound money that has been appropriated by Congress. In the same period, the Supreme Court rejected President Nixon's impoundment of funds for clean water infrastructure after the court failed to find any presidential impoundment authority in the Clean Water Act. Second, the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 supplements these basic principles in legal decisions. The law creates a process whereby the president can propose that Congress, using expedited procedures, grant him the authority to temporarily or permanently withhold appropriated funds. The president sets this process in motion with a request to Congress, but it is Congress that makes the call about withholding appropriated funds. Third, the president's decisions relating to spending also need to comply with general principles of constitutional and administrative law. Once the federal government contracts for the provision of goods or services, the government may not arbitrarily refuse to honor those contractual commitments. Thanks to the First Amendment, moreover, the government may not pick and choose which financial commitments to honor based simply on the political beliefs or opinions expressed by the recipients of federal money. Well-settled principles of administrative law prohibit agency actions that violate federal statutes and forbid agencies to act arbitrarily. Longstanding principles also require agencies to explain themselves in reasoned terms when they take actions that affect legal rights. Alleging without explanation or evidence that a recipient of federal money has engaged in fraud is a negative exemplar of arbitrary action. The Trump administration has flouted these legal principles. It has put blanket funding freezes in place across the federal government. It has not invoked any specific legislative authority for its funding cutoffs or explained why it can override duly enacted legislation. President Trump has also not asked Congress for permission to withhold appropriated funds. He's just withheld them. The second highest official in the Office of Management and Budget has argued that the Impoundment Control Act unconstitutionally infringes on the president's purported constitutional responsibility to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. To invoke faithful execution of the laws while denigrating the law that would prevent ransacking legislatively created agencies and programs is to mock the rule of law. Not content just to ignore congressional spending directives, the administration has tried to unilaterally renege on the government's contractual commitments to pay money for goods provided and services rendered. It has attacked specific grant programs, attempting to terminate contracts unilaterally and claw back billions of dollars in already obligated funds, often based on the beliefs and expression associated with those programs. The administration has also failed to offer reasoned explanations for its actions. Not surprisingly, multiple lawsuits have ensued. States, cities, universities, and others have challenged the Trump administration's withdrawal of funding from programs covering a wide range of subjects, including climate change, medical research, and foreign aid. In several cases, federal courts have issued preliminary injunctions instructing the administration to release the withheld federal funds. The administration has balked at these judicial orders. One federal judge has found that the administration has violated his order requiring the administration to lift its categorical freezes on federal funds. Government lawyers and political appointees have sent conflicting signals about the degree of the administration's compliance with judicial instructions. It has even been hard to understand who's running the Trump administration's assault on federal funding. One day it appears that the so-called Department of Government Efficiency is taking the lead. The next, perhaps it's the agencies themselves. Even if we knew that the entity presently known as DOJ was in charge, it would remain unclear exactly who is in charge of DOJ. The actions and leaders of the secrecy surrounding the actions and leaders of the defunding efforts and the confusion and chaos it engenders confounds the public's ability to hold the leaders accountable for their actions, either in a court of law or in the court of public opinion. That appears to be the point. Our constitutional system relies on each branch of government to check wrongdoing by the others. The president and his aides will not cease their illegal activity on their own. The courts have begun to push back on the administration's flagrant violations of the constitutional order and settled law. Congress must step up as well. The Trump administration's assertions of unilateral power to control the spending of the federal government threaten one of Congress's core constitutional powers. Some in Congress may believe that ceding this power is a small price to pay for currying favor with a mercurial president and shrinking government spending without having to pass new legislation. But power, once seized, tends to stay with the usurper.
Thank you, Professor. I learned a lot. And certainly thank you for having us here today. Sunny Merriman's honored to be here. My name is Kaylee Edgerly. I'm proud President and CEO of Sunny Merriman. We are a bus company. We are a bus company dealership in Virginia. Not like an automotive dealership with cookies and showroom floors, but we got hardworking people that are out supporting school districts, health care organizations, transit agencies, working people that rely on a lot of public funding and support to do their job. Sunny Merriman's been around for 55 years, started as a family business, actually 58 years ago, and now we're an employee stock-owned program, ESOP company. So we're proud of that. It's our company. We want our company to have success. We don't think that we have customers, but we think we have partners in the industry. Some of our partners are electric school bus partners. And that's my story. And I think an electric school bus, I am biased. but I think it's like rainbows, butterflies, and electric school buses. It's a perfect use case. It's a very expensive asset that is deployed 5 hours a day, has the opportunity to be charged during the middle of the day, at the end of the day, has the opportunity to partner with a utility like we do with our friends at Dominion Energy, and it's for kids, and it's learning, and it's technology. It's just the perfect use case. So we deployed this electric vehicle program in 2019 is when our dealership began this journey. And since we deployed 235 vehicles across the great Commonwealth of Virginia, 40% of those 235 vehicles came from the IIJA Clean School Bus Program, where funding is now frozen. Personally, I'm also vested. Prior to joining Sunny Merriman, I spent my career at Thomas Built Buses, the manufacturer of said school buses, of which we purchased them. So I am actually the cook that gets to eat what I make. And that's what we're doing in the market right now, and it's been a joy. It's been a success. It's been challenging. There's been hard days, and there's been bad days, but we're doing good things. And as I told you earlier, we feel like we're making an impact to school districts and to our environment. Until recently. As you said, you used the words Senator Fogbank, we used the term chaos. 45 days ago, chaos set in. When districts that had applied for funding, where we had ordered school buses, were told that their funding was being frozen. That's created utter chaos within a school district, within my dealership, within the OEM that produces it, within the supply stream, very similar to Senator Whitehouse's remarks. It's created chaos, and it creates harm. Specifically at our dealership, we have 48 buses on order now, electric school buses, comprising 5 separate districts, and the funding has been frozen. They were awarded months ago, and the train left the station. The vehicles started to be built. Some of them are at my dealership. Some of them are still at the OEM, but it creates great strain even financially on our dealership. The vehicles at my dealership now, out of the 48, comprise about $12,000 a month of interest payments. And that's only going to grow as the remaining 40 vehicles come. It could get up to $120,000 that we are paying a month to the fine banks in Lynchburg, Virginia, in interest payments. Additionally, our company runs on a line of credit. We're not rich of cash. These vehicles coming our way, the train that has left the station is $20 million of cash. We have a line of credit of $30 million with our banks. If we hit that limit, and we will, 2/3 of our line of credit could be consumed with these buses. We can't pay payroll, as you said. We can't pay our bills. We can't pay our vendors. All on commitments that were made in awards. The train left the station. Now we're left holding the bag. In addition, the 235 units in the state of Virginia is growing, so we hedged our bets. We made investments in people. We made our investments in property. We made our investments in tools, in training, to the tune of probably $1.5–2 million over the last year, our business. It's a small business, but we hedged that bet because we need to support our partners. All that money could be gone. Could be a waste if it's not unfrozen. Now, if we shift from the dealer to the manufacturer where I used to work is also in a tough spot. The supply stream is tough. And to deliver these within the grant application process, the manufacturer has to order commodities, materials, batteries, transmissions, inverters well in advance. The entire industry, all school bus manufacturers, by my estimation, has about $1 billion invested in these materials. They're sitting on the shelf. That's not to mention the buses that are rolling down the line. So it's impacting them as well. It's impacting my partners. We have great utility partners in the state of Virginia. The one that has been most active in the electric vehicle space has been Dominion Energy. Great partners. They've spent $30 million installing infrastructure, running electricity from a pole down to electrical equipment to chargers. They've invested in the chargers, not for personal business gain, but for innovation and V2G and learning how to partner and make these assets valuable and as valuable as they can be. Now they see the freeze. What should they do in the future? They're stuck, too, in this chaos. Not to mention that the 48 vehicles I mentioned, they've bought $1 million worth of chargers for these school districts to support those vehicles. So our partners at Dominion are under stress as well. And finally, there's the school districts. The school districts across the state, and we have vehicles running in 40 of 135 school districts, and very similar numbers for other states. But chaos is set in there too. We've received some canceled orders. We've received consternation at school board meetings that we're able to see about confusion about which way to head. They have made their budgets already for the 25-26 fiscal year at all the school districts, which do not include additional money for buying school buses, of which funding will be canceled for. Without these school buses, they're either not operating and not delivering kids, or they're operating school buses that are 10 to 15 years old emissions, big black plumes out of the exhaust, and about 6 miles per gallon of fuel economy. Their operating costs will go up. And that's not to mention the environmental effects. We're very proud that the 235 vehicles that we've deployed, not only are they transporting kids cleanly, but we can't talk in big numbers, we talk in rainbows and butterflies and also balloons. Our fleet so far has reduced 73 million birthday balloons of greenhouse gases. We have an impact, and we're proud of it. In summary, my remarks focused on us and our supply stream, but we're one of probably 200 school bus dealers across the country representing 5 or 6 critical OEMs that have invested heavily millions of dollars of capital. And this freeze has brought chaos to it. We have come to know the federal government to be predictable and trusted when providing grants. Therefore, we order buses from it. It is not predictable and trusted over the last 45 days. I think of the core of our industry is a school bus driver going to a stop every day in a predictable and trusted fashion, picking up our children between 7:02 and 7:04 every day. They're there, they're predictable and trusted. So does the federal government. Don't leave us, the manufacturers, or the school districts alone at the bus stop.
Nicely said. Mr. Aroniano.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Phil Aroniano. I'm the Chief Partnership and Strategy Officer for Climate United Fund. Climate United is a nonprofit financial institution established to leverage public and private financing to break down barriers to clean energy deployment. Our mission is to build a stronger economy that lowers energy costs, creates jobs, spurs American manufacturing, and improves environmental quality for all Americans. Our funding has also been frozen by the EPA since February 18th. I'm here to talk a little bit about the impact of that freeze and to share some background on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. About the GGRF, following the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, EPA launched the $27 billion Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. 3 programs were established under GGRF: Solar for All, the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, CCIA, and the National Clean Investment Fund, NCIF. The NCIF program was statutorily designed to leverage private capital alongside public funds, as you had mentioned. Climate United was the largest awardee under the NCIF program and is comprised of 3 established financial institutions with over 120 years of combined experience managing more than $30 billion in public and institutional capital: Calvert Impact, Community Preservation Corporation, and the Center for Community Self-Help. Climate United, like all GGRF awardees, underwent an extensive 9-month multi-stage review and selection process that culminated in a $6.9 billion award in April 2024, which was formally executed last August. This process included an expert review panel of federal government employees from across agencies who scored each application across a variety of criteria. In the initial design of the program, EPA contemplated a financial agent structure to permit the awardees to leverage private capital. As a result, all NCIF and CCIA awardees are legally required in our terms and conditions to access our funding through an account the EPA set up with Citibank using a financial agency agreement. FAA's financial agency agreements have been used by administrations of both parties, including the first Trump administration, for over 150 years to enable federal funds to be distributed in a way that maintains federal oversight while enabling leverage in private financial markets. Climate United's strategy focuses in 3 areas, primarily energy-efficient buildings, electric transportation, and clean electricity generation, and a number of other sectors that reduce costs and pollution. We aim to leverage at least $21 billion in private capital, 3 to 4 times the public funding available, extending the impact of those public dollars, and then reinvesting those funds as they are repaid to us so that they are recycled. We support American manufacturers and small businesses by driving demand for domestic clean energy products that lower costs, create good jobs, and make the U.S. more energy secure and independent. In our EPA-approved work plan, we committed to invest in communities that are overlooked. At least 60% of our financial assistance will end up in low-income and disadvantaged communities, 20% in rural areas, and 10% in tribal communities. Since receiving our award in August of last year, so just in the last 6 months or so, Climate United has hired 37 highly qualified staff members and made a number of investments, including $31.8 billion in pre-construction financing for the largest commercial solar deployment in Arkansas history, which is in partnership with the University of Arkansas. We launched a $250 million electric truck financing program that will provide affordable leasing options to small fleet operators operating at the ports of LA and Long Beach, but subsequently expanding nationally. A number of tribal projects, including a $30 million pre-development grant program called Climate United Next, which will go out to tribal projects across 18 states, and a $10.8 million loan for utility-scale solar projects on tribal lands in eastern Oregon and Idaho, along with a $1.5 million investment for building upgrades at an affordable multifamily building in Portland, Oregon. And we're just getting started. Early projects and programs announced across the whole GDRF program are estimated to generate already $2.7 billion in cost savings, over $866 million in local economic benefits, and more than 49,000 jobs. And again, this is just in the first 6 months of this program being operational. On February 18th of 2025, without warning, Citibank, EPA's financial agent, ceased processing our funding requests. And despite multiple inquiries to both Citibank and EPA over the following weeks, we received no substantive response explaining the legal basis for these actions. This sudden termination of access to our grant funds with really no explanation is causing immediate damage. We can't meet payroll. We can't fulfill our $20 million in legally binding loan commitments to borrowers. We can't distribute the $17 million in grants and investments already approved for tribal projects across 19 states. We risk defaulting on vendor contracts and office leases. And perhaps most importantly, our reputation as a reliable financial partner is being damaged. Earlier this week, we filed a lawsuit in federal court, and oral arguments in that case are being heard this afternoon. Yesterday evening, under 24 hours before the hearing, we received a notice of grant termination from EPA. This notice of grant termination does not allege any wrongdoing by Climate United. Without immediate restoration of our funding, Climate United will be unable to meet our obligations, severely harming our mission to expand clean energy access to rural, low-income, and tribal communities across America. And I would just request that members of this committee take immediate action to investigate this matter further. Thank you.
County Executive Bell, thank you for being here, sir. Ball, County Executive Ball.
Well, thank you so much, and good afternoon, Senators Whitehouse, also Brooks, other distinguished senators, and hardworking staff of the Environment and Public Works Committee. I'm Calvin Ball, and during the last 7 years, it has been my honor to serve as county executive. Located in the heart of Maryland, Howard County is conveniently situated between the city of Baltimore and our nation's capital. Maryland is home to major federal institutions, including Fort Detrick's and Meade, the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Even more importantly, our state is home to more than 140,000 federal employees and tens of thousands more federal government contractors. They are courageous public servants who have built their careers serving the greater good and the American people. Just yesterday, I joined Senators also Brooks and Van Hollen and Congresswoman Elfreth to host a town hall that was attended personally by more than 1,000 people and virtually by thousands more. We saw their sadness and felt their distress. This period of heightened instability and uncertainty has been anxiety-inducing for federal workers and those impacted across our country. Local governments are facing concerns about federal funding across the nation, from Vermont to California. We estimate that the total impact of federal aid to Howard County, if it is cut, could be more than $150 million. This funding supports vital operations and capital infrastructure projects necessary for the safety and well-being of our residents. As past president of the Maryland Association of Counties, I want to especially thank the National Association of Counties for their efforts to advocate for counties across our great nation. Any freeze of federal funding could significantly impair any county's ability to sustain support for important operations and initiatives. Among them are food access programs for seniors, including those with mobility challenges or chronic health conditions. Last year alone, we saw a 23% increase in households served at our local food bank. Victims services, victims of child abuse, child neglect, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Located along the eastern seaboard with major north to south and east to west connectors, Howard County is a critical nexus of human trafficking prevention efforts. In recent years, we have identified and provided a comprehensive service to more than 100 victims of sex and labor trafficking. Opioid and substance misuse treatment. Between 2018 and 2024, non-fatal overdoses have fallen more than 85% in Howard County, and fatal overdoses have fallen by approximately 43%. These successful efforts have been supported in part by federal funds and emergency preparedness efforts, including disaster response and infrastructure projects. Now, regarding infrastructure, halting or rescinding federal funds could significantly impact our ability to deliver critical projects needed to ensure the public safety and economic vitality of our historic Main Street in Ellicott City. In 2011, 2016, and 2018, devastating and deadly floods washed away the livelihoods, caused tens of millions of dollars in damage, and tragically claimed 3 lives. In 2018, less than a month after taking office, we launched Ellicott City Safe and Sound, a comprehensive flood mitigation plan through major climate-resilient infrastructure projects. Currently, federal funding for this plan includes a $75 million WIFIA loan from the EPA and $20 million in funding from FEMA. The total Safe and Sound infrastructure plan costs roughly $250 million, of which more than a third is federal funding. Uncertainty about federal funding places Howard County in an extremely precarious position, assuming tremendous financial risk. We know that at least $20 million in FEMA funds for these projects have been halted pending review, threatening our continued progress on these life-saving infrastructure projects. Similarly, FEMA has paused grants related to emergency management functions at the local level. Whether it's responding to devastating wildfires in California or flood mitigation in states like Rhode Island and Maryland, these infrastructure grants and emergency response funds support disaster recovery funds and emergency coordination with local, state, and federal government. Without this support, we are all less equipped to respond to emergency weather incidences, which are on the rise due to the worsening climate change. Compounding these challenges, FEMA recently canceled all National Fire Academy classes, leaving many firefighters without critical training and harming our nation's ability to respond effectively to firefighting incidences around our great nation. We also understand that funds through the United States Department of Transportation that are not yet under agreement have been paused, and for Howard County, this jeopardizes more than $4 million in funds through the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which supports electric vehicle infrastructure in partnership with the Maryland Department of Transportation. We also have concerns about the federal carbon reduction grants for Howard County, which support multimodal transportation to better connect our residents to transit, as well as expand access to electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Both are part of our local strategy to combat climate change and promote energy independence, as well as health and wellness. And beyond infrastructure, we are gravely concerned about the impact of recent executive action by the Trump administration and Elon Musk to decimate the federal workforce. Tens of thousands of Howard County residents are federal workers or contractors, and Howard County receives the highest amount of the second highest amount of federal contracting dollars in the state of Maryland, totaling more than $6 billion in 2024 alone. In Maryland, recent estimates place that number of federal workers that have been fired, eliminated, or resigned at tens of thousands, and this has thrown our county, our state, and our nation into turmoil as thousands of our constituents are searching for employment. While talented and strong counties simply do not possess the resources to shift funding within their budgets to backfill large holes that may be left by loss in federal funds, especially now. The actions of Elon Musk and Doge have also impaired the federal government's ability to deliver core services. And as you recently noted in your letter to the EPA, proposed plans by Musk and Doge to slash the workforce or spending would have disastrous consequences on the delivery of infrastructure projects and climate change mitigation. I believe that collaboration is effective and efficient as a strategy, and the counties stand ready to collaborate. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to share with you this afternoon and look forward to ongoing dialogue.
Thank you very much, County Executive Ball. They've called another vote, and I'm obliged to go do that. So it's about 8 or 10 minutes away. So I will call a brief recess, and I will allow my staff, if somebody else who has voted turns up in the meantime, to permit them to proceed, but otherwise we'll recess for 8 or 10 minutes while I go do that. Oh, and here is Senator Padilla. I will not go into recess. Senator Padilla has the floor, and I'll try to get back before your questions are done. I'll just keep asking questions.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your participation in the hearing today. I just walked in and wasn't able to listen to your opening statements in real time. We have received your testimony that you submitted prior to, so appreciate the work you do, your expertise that you're sharing with us, and for your participation here today. Now, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I think I speak for a lot of us when I say we're here today, because in just over the last 7 weeks, less than 2 months, the Trump administration has decided to attack the historic funding for communities across the country that we've been able to fight for and approve in the last couple of sessions of Congress. And when I say we, I'm not just talking Democrats. It's bipartisan funding that is intended to keep kids safe on their way to school, on the way home from school, and to protect the clean air that we breathe and create good-paying jobs along the way. Right? Economic growth and environmental protection are not mutually exclusive. We can and must do both. But because Donald Trump is laser-focused on delivering more tax breaks for billionaires, working families are in the position of having to pay the price if they have their way. This is not how government is supposed to function, at least not the way I was taught or why I do this job. So today we're shining this light on the abuse of power in our effort to hold this administration accountable. Now, the first topic I want to bring up, I think, is near and dear to most, if not all of us. Through the Inflation Reduction Act, we invested in domestic manufacturing to promote a sustainable transportation and boosted our global competitiveness. Of course, this administration now trying to undermine those efforts by illegally terminating funding from the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Climate United and Ford Mobility plan to utilize $250 million from a GGRF award to purchase 500 zero-emission drayage trucks to serve the San Pedro-based ports complex, one of the significant projects with tangible benefits that we've been eagerly awaiting. This investment alone would more than double the number of zero-emission trucks currently serving the ports and would be the largest purchase of American-made electric trucks in history. My question is for you, Mr. Oranayu. 500 zero-emission trucks is quite a lot of trucks. What kind of market signal would simply that investment alone send?
Thank you, Senator Padilla. The strategy behind the trucks program is not solely to purchase 500 trucks. It's also to establish a market signal around the residual value of trucks. So if you are an investor investing in trucks or somebody who's buying a truck, you want to know what the value of that truck will be after 3, 4, 5 years after you've used it so that you can sell that on. And the residual value is also crucially important for investors, whether that's a lessor or somebody who's providing a loan for that truck, so they know what the value of that truck will be. So we intend to increase the scale and transform the market around electric trucks nationwide, not just in the ports of LA and Long Beach, by purchasing, as you mentioned, 500 Class 8 electric trucks, and also by establishing that residual value so that in future years, private finance can come in and expand that market even further beyond just the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles.
Yeah, I appreciate you talking not just about the primary market and its significance, but the value of the secondary market that becomes created. Now, just as a follow-up, we know that China is aggressively subsidizing infrastructure, battery production, and zero-emission vehicles. How does the termination that this administration has called for impact our global competitiveness, particularly against China?
Well, just a couple months ago, a number of the equipment manufacturers of electric trucks announced a new battery factory, Amplify Cells, in Marshall County, Mississippi, which would be among the largest battery manufacturers for these kinds of heavy-duty trucks in the U.S. I think it might be one of the only heavy-duty battery manufacturers in the U.S. Right now, because our funds are frozen, we're unable to make these purchase orders for these trucks, which has downstream effects on the supply chain, which would ultimately put some of these battery manufacturers and truck manufacturers in a tight place when it comes to competitiveness and global competitiveness. If we're not there to provide this financing, this industry will not thrive.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just raise just one more topic before recognizing Senator Merkley, who's just arrived. Also, welcome Senator Markey, champion on many of these issues for many years as well. Now, one of the programs from the bipartisan infrastructure law that I'm particularly proud of is the Clean School Bus Program, which was based on the Clean Commute for Kids Act that I introduced along with Senator Warnock. The program has supported 8,500 clean school bus projects in 1,200 districts across the country, helping improve air quality for our kids, fueling domestic manufacturing, and creating good-paying jobs. However, as we've heard today, the administration has thrown the program into disarray by freezing the program's rebates. Now, this chaos is having real consequences, yes, for school districts, yes, for manufacturers, yes, for small businesses, but also for the kids who rely on that cleaner school bus to arrive at school and get home at the end of the day without suffering the health impacts that diesel school buses create. Mr. Edgerly, thank you for being here. During your time leading Thomas-built buses, I understand you oversaw the rollout of the company's all-electric school bus fleet. How is this funding uncertainty impacting the bottom line for manufacturers, and what messages does it send to other manufacturers who may be looking to get into this line of business?
I think my colleague to the left hit on it when he was talking about the battery manufacturing. Being part of a very big corporation, there are only set funds that can be spent on capital in testing and development. And when we started back in 2015, we were all in. It was a perfect use case for a school bus, and I was granted by my bosses unbridled freedom to spend what I needed for an electric school bus. And we did. And we built that momentum, and we spent millions and millions of dollars of testing and reliability growth and investing in manufacturing places and investing in battery supply. Now my colleagues at the place I used to work, who I'm still do business with on an everyday basis, are taking pause and questioning where their future investments should be. So it just causes undue pause in the market of investment and perhaps pull back. He talked about the scale of 500 buses and what it can do to manufacturing jobs and start to drive down the price of some initially very expensive technology. Well, that stops all that, and it breaks all the momentum that we've built over the last 5 years.
And I think important for the record here, you probably have much better data and insight than I do. But some of the attacks I've heard on this program specifically is, oh, it must be sort of a coastal program for coastal communities, or blue states versus red states, or urban districts versus rural districts. What kind of communities have primarily benefited from this so far?
All of them. And Virginia itself, that's where we do business, it has red states and blue states. And if we introduce electric school bus to the red state, I've heard stories of mechanics, greasy guys that work on the product saying, I don't want this thing I don't want it in my area. I used to work in a coal mine. There's a lot of attitude that comes with it, and there's a lot of motion. Same guy, 6 months later, operating the bus in central Nelson County, greenest place in Virginia, says, I can't complain. The thing just runs all day. So we have to manage not only the product, but people's mindset when it comes to the product. And we found that the more positive mindset, the quicker and the healthier adoption and the faster environmental impacts. And then signing up again for the next round of funding because they like it.
They tend to perform better, easier on not just operations, but maintenance, I imagine.
It is, far less moving parts.
And saving money over time. Love it. Thank you again for being here. I'll turn it over to Senator Merkley.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Padilla, and thank you to all of you. It's a crazy world we're in right now, so we're just trying to catch up on one story and what's going on, and 3 other things are happening. And I wanted to start, Mr. Arunyanu, close enough? Welcome. We're delighted to have you from Climate United. And I saw in your bio that you were a co-founder of 350.org.
That's right.
Well, if you haven't already explained that to somebody, can you tell us what the 350 stands for?
350 is the maximum amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in parts per million, above which it's a danger for humans and other flora and fauna to exist.
And 350 is already way above the level we were at pre-industrial, which was approximately 280 parts per million.
That's right.
And so theoretically, humankind would have worked together and said, we need to make sure we don't go above 350, which was the goal of the 350.org organization.
That was the goal a few years ago.
And here we are now at somewhere about 420. And these may just sound like numbers, but this is about the planet having way too much carbon dioxide and methane in the air, and therefore trapping way too much heat. And in my state, we see that in everything. We see it in the declining average snowpack in the Cascade Mountains. We see it in the longer, hotter fire season. We see it in the drought. We see it in the change of the chemistry of the ocean off Oregon. Oregon's the north of California. California, I'm sure, has great fisheries, but nothing like Oregon with the upwelling of the nutrients and the California current combining to all types of fisheries, and so many impacts are occurring. Anyway, I just wanted to note all of that because it certainly is relevant to the goal of your current organization, Climate United. And as I understand it, you were one of several organizations awarded significant amount of funds from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to fund domestic clean energy development.
That's right.
So then, just trying to catch up with what's happened in the last couple days, Zeldin announced that city-maintained GGRF grants are officially terminated.
That was last night.
And that was last night. Okay. And you're challenging those terminations?
We're challenging the freeze and the termination today in court, yeah.
Now, the administrator of the EPA, Administrator Zeldin, he said this is had to happen because of issues regarding integrity and programmatic fraud. Did they share any details of what they found that they were so concerned about?
We've not received any communication directly from EPA regarding any kind of fraud.
As far as we know, this is just an invented excuse to shut down a fund to help tackle the biggest challenge humanity faces?
Frankly, we're perplexed about why we're being frozen.
So there are a couple, it's profoundly disturbing to me. I mean, here it is affecting every corner of our planet. We have no planet B. And this strategy, this Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, is certainly a way to tackle the challenge from many, many different directions. I think two of the directions that you've been involved in are utility scale solar, including in Oregon. And if you haven't already done so, can you just describe in a few sentences what that project was all about?
Absolutely. We have a number of projects in Oregon, a $1.5 million high-performance building upgrade in Portland, and a $10.8 million pre-development loan for 3 utility-scale solar projects in tribal lands in both eastern Oregon and Idaho. And when complete, those projects will provide up to 885 megawatts of renewable affordable energy while helping those tribes monetize their land resources and delivering benefits and jobs.
Is one of those tribes the Warm Springs?
Yeah.
And one of the challenges is moving that energy to market. How will that be solved for that solar project?
There will need to be transmission from those areas to the coastal areas.
Well, I'm delighted to see it. You know, I go to every county every year in Oregon, and one thing the Warm Springs have is a lot of sunshine and land, but one of the challenges has been having the transmission to be able to move that energy off. So in what possible way does the administration's action, EPA's action in kind of sabotaging this strategy to add solar power help with their goal of, quote, energy dominance?
I'm not sure I can answer that.
Well, I'll just say that certainly if it's a project to add energy, you would think that that contributes to the energy portfolio of the United States. And I'm arguing that we have to follow a simple formula, and that simple formula is electrify everything with renewable energy. If we do that, we save the planet, and this is part of it. So I'm very concerned about that. I also wanted to understand your project regarding affordable housing and how that's related to energy issues.
Part of our work, and this part of our work is led by the Community Preservation Corporation. One of our coalition members is retrofitting and doing new building of affordable housing in this country to both address the housing crisis and electrify all those buildings. That creates jobs, it saves money, it promotes clean air and water, and also addresses the deep housing crisis that we're in right now.
Kind of like a win-win-win?
That's what we're going
Or
for.
actually, maybe what you said was a win-win-win-win.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Professor Heiserling. We've seen OMB Director Russ vote freeze funding across agencies, particularly for critical programs and projects that support energy, renewable energy and specifically, healthy communities, critical transportation. Have courts found that these freezes are illegal?
Yes, they have begun to rule against the administration, even issuing injunctions in some cases. The freezes are plainly illegal. The Congress, under the Constitution, is given the authority to appropriate money. The president has no inherent authority to refuse to spend money under the Constitution.
And this has been previously adjudicated in the past, going back to the impoundment of funds by Nixon to the EPA.
Exactly, exactly. And in fact, that's a very interesting case to remember, which is in that case, the Clean Water Act had been passed by Congress overwhelmingly. Maybe there were a couple of negative votes, but overwhelmingly. President Nixon tried to veto it, vetoed it. It passed again over his veto, and then he impounded the funds. And the Supreme Court, by the time it got to the Supreme Court, everybody had dropped the idea that he had constitutional authority to do that. The question was whether he had authority under the statute, and the Supreme Court said, no, he does not have that authority. And if you think about it, it's really, it's effectively, if you try to take away money that's been appropriated by Congress, it's effectively a kind of veto. Right? But we have a way to do that. That's veto.
So one of the issue that some of the administration folks have said is that case, I think it was the train case, did not resolve the constitutional issue, and you just kind of alluded to that, saying by the time it got to the court, it was no longer a constitutional issue, because everyone agreed that it was a violation of the Constitution, more or less. Is that the...
Yes, yes. Lower courts had held that. The Supreme Court didn't have to decide that question. And even conservative justices like Chief Justice Rehnquist in his time and Justice Kavanaugh have cast doubt in various writings on the power of the president to impound money.
Well, and I'm thinking that there's a parallel to when, back in 1996, Congress passed the line item veto, basically delegated to the executive the responsibility or the power of the purse. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't delegate your separation of powers because that's essential in a republic. One body makes the law, another implements it. But Mr. Russell Vogt, now head of OMB, he has been very clear when he met with me, and I think very clear in other settings, that he wants to adjudicate this issue back to the Supreme Court and hopefully gain the Supreme Court support for more powerful executives. I refer to it as an imperial presidency. I think they call it the unitary executive. And what is it Mr. Vogt's trying to accomplish there? Does he want to basically say, no, let's take the power of the purse away from Congress?
I think so, yes.
I think very much so from what he has said. I am concerned, very concerned, that this court might find some way to grant more powers to the president. And I'll tell you why, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just speaking as, common American in this way. And that is because when I heard the Supreme Court was going to consider whether or not the president was exempt from criminal prosecution as long as he said an act was an official act of government, I said, there's no way in hell that this Supreme Court could ever find that. Our founders were so absolutely clear they didn't want anybody above the law. They certainly didn't want a king. And to say that because he signs a government paper, he can come and shoot you or shoot me and no crime's been committed, to me, that was horrific. Nowhere to be found in the Constitution. Were you also disturbed by that?
I was extremely disturbed by that,
Is there some
surprised by
invisible
it.
ink in the Constitution that these so-called originalists found that none of the officers have been able to find over more than 200 years?
Right. It's strange. They went even beyond what Trump's lawyers had argued in that case and made statements that go well beyond the decision that they were making.
Well, thank you, Professor. I am going to yield to my colleague from Massachusetts, Senator Markey.
You can have a second round, though, if you want to continue.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sheldon, for having this very important meeting. Mr. Aroninu, huh? Correct? Aroninu?
Close enough.
You and I both know the reason that Trump, Musk, and Zeldin are attacking the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is based on the National Climate Bank Act, which Chris Van Hollen and I introduced into the Congress. And they're attacking it because it will bring jobs and much needed economic stimulus for clean energy and climate resilience projects, everything big oil is afraid of. So the whole of the climate bank, I'll call it, has $20 billion in it. Now, think of it another way. Big oil gets a $3 billion tax break every single year. So in 7 years, they have $21 billion in tax breaks, equal to the climate bank, $20 billion. But you don't hear anyone looking at big oil, big gas, their tax break as waste, fraud, and corruption. Never going to hear that. Because subsidizing, let's be honest, subsidizing the oil industry to drill for oil is like subsidizing fish to swim or birds to fly. You just don't have to do that. That is absolutely a waste of money, let's be honest. But they're not going to look at that. This kind of direct attack on clean energy is, always obviously part of the drill, baby, drill, big gas, big oil, big coal agenda of the Trump administration. Now, McKinsey, when they looked at the $20 billion, they estimated that the bank is going to, in fact, generate $250 billion worth of public and private investment over the first 10 years. Over 10 years, $250 billion worth of investment, most of it private sector. Creating jobs, reducing energy bills for hardworking Americans. And thanks to your hard work and the Biden EPA's long, thoughtful, and transparent process, Climate United and 7 other nonprofits were selected as Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund grantees a year ago, last April. Yet, while you're just starting the process of selecting the individual projects to fund around the country, you've also been the subject of an unprecedented witch hunt by EPA Administrator Zeldin. He has claimed rampant waste, fraud, and abuse and has set the Department of Justice and the FBI on your trail with baseless accusations, jeopardizing jobs and energy savings nationwide. That fear-mongering led Citibank, where the $20 billion was placed, to freeze these statutorily obligated funds despite contracts between Citibank, the federal government, and each grantee to disperse the funds. Now, we're experts on this because this is where the statute was written. We wrote the statute in this committee. We created the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, also known as the Climate Bank, right here. So we did it. And you're looking at the authors right here. So obviously, we're a little bit ticked right now, that they're freezing the funds without any evidence that there is anything wrong with it except the fact that big oil and big gas just hate the idea that they might start losing some customers because green energy is going to be lower cost and replace them. This situation is quickly evolving. Just yesterday, Zeldin announced he was terminating all greenhouse gas reduction grants, and today, you're in court. You're over there. EPA, City Court, and you're bringing a suit in federal district court because they don't have any evidence. So tell us about this last week, because I led a letter to Citibank with Leader Schumer and Senators Whitehouse and Van Hollen, asking for answers on why Citibank had frozen the money and what guidance they had received from the Trump administration. So far, we have heard nothing. What information has Climate United received from Citibank on why funds were originally frozen and why they continue to be frozen today? What is the reason that they gave you?
Thank you, Senator Markey. Frankly, we don't know the reason.
Excuse me?
We don't know the reason.
They haven't given you any reason.
They haven't given us any reason.
Have they presented you with any evidence that you've done anything wrong?
They have not presented us with any evidence.
If they did ask you, would there be any evidence that you did anything wrong?
We would willingly sit down with Administrator Zeldin, EPA staff, DOJ, FBI, whoever we need to sit down with and explain what our program is, transparently share all of the transaction information that statutorily and in our terms and conditions we have already provided for the EPA. They have oversight over this program, and we are willing and ready to provide that information.
Yeah, so this is like Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass. First, the verdict, then the trial. So they've already reached a conclusion without any evidence, and we know why. But ultimately, we are a nation of laws, and people cannot be charged with a crime, with doing something wrong, unless there's evidence. And they haven't presented any evidence yet. So what would Americans be missing out on if this climate bank model is destroyed by the Trump administration on behalf of the oil and gas and coal industry?
I can speak to what are in the work plans of what's in our work plan at Climate United, and more generally the goals of the NCIF program, the National Clean Investment Fund, and the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. These are designed to leverage private capital alongside public funds. That's a bipartisan idea.
Now, do you agree with that number that McKinsey came up with, that it's roughly a 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 to 1 ratio between the public money that's put up and the private sector money that will then follow it in each project?
These are projections. It seems plausible to me. In our program, we're anticipating 3 to 4 times the public funding on top of the $6.9 billion that we were awarded and are in contract with the EPA to deploy. Just in the first 6 months of this program, among CCIA and NCIF awardees, some of these early projects are estimated to generate $2.7 billion in cost savings for consumers, over $866 million in local economic benefits, and more than 49,000 jobs. And those are just some of the earliest projects in the last 6 months. And we're just getting started.
Yeah, and again, let's just go to the numbers. In 2024, 93% of all new electrical generation capacity installed in the United States was wind, solar, and batteries. 93%. So obviously, this business model is working, and it's a big threat to oil, gas, and coal, because it's working and it's low cost. And so they clearly don't want it on the books for 10 years. You can't have 10 years of 93% being wind, solar, and batteries, or other clean energy technologies which are deployed. It just ruins their whole argument that these new technologies cannot play a big role. And so I thank you for all of your work, and we're going to have your back as much as is humanly possible. It is just absolutely reprehensible that they're bringing charges without any evidence whatsoever. And Mr. Edgerly, just one final question. Do you have any evidence that this funding for clean buses is still being stopped, or have they, pursuant to court orders, now released that money to go into communities?
What our districts have learned over the last week is for certain segments of the funding, they've opened up the computer portal, meaning you can interact and send some messages. But we've checked, and so certain segments, the portal is not open. Even though the portal is open, I've checked across the nation with all of our partners in the industry. Despite it being open, we don't know of one case where someone has been able to draw down funds yet.
You still have no information about?
Ability to draw down funds.
Yeah.
The portal's open. We can go in there and say, on the behalf of our district, yes, we'd like to reinvigorate the grant that was awarded, and this is the money that was granted towards us, but it's just a computer talking to us at that
So
point.
it's like Hotel California. You can check in, but you just can't check out with the money.
Nothing's been
Or the
checked
buses.
out
Yeah.
yet, Senator.
No, I got it. I see the game that they're playing. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Markey. Senator Alsobrooks.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I have just a few questions for County Executive Ball. We had as you know, at the town hall last night, and had the opportunity to hear from a good number of federal employees. And I know that Howard County houses a disproportionate share of federal workers who are either in the government or contractors. And I'm just wondering, I'm sure that you've heard so many stories from these patriots who have had their livelihood disrupted, and wonder whether you can share some of the stories that you've heard from civil servants who are losing their jobs and the work that they do that we know is so very important to our country and for Marylanders.
Well, thank you, Senator Alsobrooks, and thank you so much for your leadership, not only here in Washington, but throughout the great state of Maryland. We've heard from so many federal employees and contractors of not only the uncertainty, some of them have even at the same time of getting resignation letters where they were trying to be forced out, also got letters saying that they should be promoted because their supervisor has left. So there's these mixed messages. They are unsure. They are unsure about how to address keeping a roof over their head, food on the table. Those who are being forced to come back, we're going to look at traffic issues, child care issues. There are, of course, the mental health strain, but some who were forced out, they were had significant mental health and surgeries scheduled. And then some, frankly, even left the private sector for the stability of the federal government. They were bringing their time, their talent, their experience to serve the American people in such a noble way, and here they are being tossed aside.
You know, we heard, I think, from a number of them who said they love their work, and we know they do very important work on behalf of our country, and I wonder whether you just might also be able to share some of the stories of people and some of what they've done. So, for example, I know that we had a number of nuclear scientists who were terminated, and of course, they learned very quickly that these were vital employees, and the administration went about trying to rehire them right away and couldn't find them. So I know you may also have heard about some of the important work that they do, and I wonder if you can just share some of what you've heard about which agencies they represent and the work they've done.
That's right. The haphazard way that people have been let go, being told that it was because of them being ineffective employees or poor performance, and then having years of documented excellent performance has been unacceptable. And you mentioned not only nuclear scientists, some of the brightest, hardest working people who are serving not only here but abroad. Those who work in cybersecurity. Howard County has nearly 300 cybersecurity companies in and around us. We are close to Fort Meade, as you know. So cybersecurity threats that we see across the world, we have people who were serving in the federal government, keeping us safe, who, as you noted very astutely, were let go, and then they tried to find them, and they couldn't find them. And now we are more vulnerable as a country because of the haphazard way that Doge and Elon Musk have gone about that.
Now, I know in addition to the disruption that's been caused by these terminations to individuals and to their families, it's also been very disruptive to our localities. And I know that the Trump administration, at some point public officials were calling him a builder, and said that throughout his career he made his name constructing big things, and that he supposedly really wanted to rebuild infrastructure in America. And the Biden administration did just that, actually, by making a bold bipartisan investment in the infrastructure through the bipartisan infrastructure law. Yet now the Trump administration's freezing these dollars that Congress appropriated. And so you mentioned, I know, the Ellicott City Safe and Sound, but wanted to know if you could tell us more about some of the specific infrastructure projects that are in jeopardy in Howard County as a result of this administration's 180-degree turn on investing in infrastructure.
Yes, ma'am, Madam Senator. Just when it comes to Safe and Sound, we have already been allocated a $75 million WIFIA loan. The first drawdown is actually expected for within the next week of $10.8 million. And this has been previously available funds, but we are hopeful that we will even be able to draw down these monies. We are talking about transportation projects when it comes to multimodal. And the instability and the lack of predictability not only hurts our work with the private sector, but as costs are going up because of the haphazard use of tariffs and the construction costs, not only are they freezing the money, but the cost of actually doing the projects is going up. So we had costs that were locked in based upon funding that was promised on the full faith and credit of the federal government that is now in jeopardy.
And the cost. So now, I also just want to ask you, when we talk about freezing funds, I know there is a lot of uncertainty that's been caused as a result of this administration's freezing of funds, and you mentioned some uncertainty around the Ellicott City Safe and Sound project, but can you tell us a little bit more about some of the other projects and how you are concerned about the increase in costs to those projects as a result of the frozen funds?
Yes, ma'am, Madam Senator. Howard County has been awarded $20 million from the Maryland Department of Emergency Management and Resilient Management revolving fund. That $20 million is spread evenly across 4 safe and sound projects: our Extended North Tunnel, Maryland Avenue culverts, our NC3 pond, and T1. These loans are backed by FEMA funds. And at this time, FEMA funding passing through the state is currently frozen for federal review. In January of '24, MDOT received $4.4 million grant from the Electric Vehicle Charger Reliability and Accessibility Accelerator Program, funding set aside from the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program to repair and replace up to 25 electric charging stations in 6 counties across the great state of Maryland, and approximately 11 of those were in Howard County. MDOT was unable to execute the grant agreement before the administration changed, and as a result, this grant is now paused due to general grant-making process reviews, and there are numerous stories in Howard County, throughout Maryland, and throughout America.
Yeah, unfortunately, throughout. I just have one final question for you, and this is an area of public safety. This is yet another area that the president claimed to have cared so much about, and he's talked a lot about it, yet we've had such a dramatic reduction in the federal workforce. And again, the freezing of funds that we talked about that we believe is actually making us less safe by the moment in Maryland and across the country. So I wonder whether you could elaborate on some of the negative consequences of this administration's actions on public safety as you see it in your county.
I think one of our top responsibilities is to keep our community safe. And we see, for example, Howard County relies upon FEMA funds, not only for capital infrastructure, but also to address national disasters, flood mitigation, and also for key personnel that staff our Emergency Operations Center. Freezing funds means that counties and cities are less resourced, less equipped, and less prepared to respond to emergencies and keep our communities safe and informed. And as I noted previously, FEMA recently canceled all National Fire Academy classes, leaving Maryland and other county firefighters without critical training and harming our nation's ability to respond effectively to not only natural disasters, but frankly, when people just call 911, and they're expecting consistency, they're expecting reliability, they're expecting sometimes for somebody to save their lives on their worst day of their life. The federal government and the funding freezes of FEMA have put that in jeopardy.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Senator.
Thank you very much, Senator Alsop-Brooks. Being a lawyer, I'm going to start with the law professor. You're very familiar with the administrative process around grant making and distribution of appropriated funds, correct? So what is the point in that process where the proposed recipient of the grant acquires a legally recognized interest in the funds?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different legal principles that come into play at various different points, and there may be a contract that provides certainty or should provide certainty. There may well be also simply the idea that once somebody has been offered or has the expectation of getting a particular fund, that the government has a responsibility to explain why they're not going to get it. And so there are many constraints on the government acting arbitrarily and taking away legal rights that the grantees have.
So in the case, for instance, of Mr. Aroniano, the funding has already left the coffers of the government. It has been put into the control of a fiscal agent, a private company, Citibank, and Citibank has instructions to follow the law and make distributions consistent with Congress's intent. At that point, does the government have a legal right to claw the money back?
Not from my perspective, no.
Unless, there's one big unless they can make an allegation that there is some criminal scheme afoot, and they have the right to seize or freeze the account in order to protect the criminal investigation and to protect the proceeds if indeed there is criminal misconduct going on. That would be the exception?
I think, I think that they are making that charge precisely in order to fit that.
That would explain why they're making all of that up.
Exactly, which separately is separately an offense in the sense that the government can't simply make those kinds of charges or can't simply make those kinds of allegations.
Yeah, I don't know if that's an area of your expertise, but I was a U.S. attorney. I was our attorney general, and I can tell you that if a prosecutor deliberately misuses the law enforcement process for an ulterior purpose, they open themselves up to a wide variety of criminal, civil, and professional consequences. So it just shows how wild and reckless this Trump administration is, that these people are willing to play with fire that way, and looks like they're going to get burned.
And they're also destroying reputations in the midst of all of this as well. And
You mentioned briefly the veto power. The President of the United States actually does have the power to deny appropriations that have been passed by Congress. The way the Constitution does that is by giving him a veto.
correct, and that didn't
There's a time
happen.
clock on it, right? That
Here,
runs
that's
out.
right, that's right. There's no like later veto. There's no ability to go back in a new administration and say, well, I would like to veto that bill that passed in the past administration.
Yeah.
And even as we were discussing, Senator Merkley and I, the idea that that you could have a line item veto where a president could X out particular appropriations, that the Supreme
does
Court
not have.
struck down, right?
Yeah.
So this is effectively a line item veto, although it's even worse than that. It's like a blunderbuss veto.
The line item veto, out of time, with no opportunity for Congress to override the veto. So
Correct.
Multiple violations of the Constitution embedded in that one act. Mr. Edgerly, thank you. Just say a little bit more. You were so eloquent about your own experience and the peril this puts your company and your workers into, but that also cascades up your supply chain. What are you hearing from the folks who are supplying components to you?
Same type of response, confusion, the fogginess that you alluded to on what they're supposed to do with their future capital investments, whether it's prudent to spend their capital money on that or not. Looking for other partners within the industry, but really not finding any. The electric vehicle is the components are very unique, and they're becoming more and more sourced in the U.S., and we deal with suppliers that are sourcing their batteries and making their battery packs here and making moves to source the actual cells here, which is the next move.
Yeah.
And I fear that a lot of those plans will come to a halt, or at least be slowed down, because companies have to be companies and be very prudent in their spending.
And if they won't step in, then it leaves the market to the original incumbents, who tend to be Chinese companies, correct?
That's accurate.
Yeah.
Some Far East companies for sure, but predominantly Chinese.
Yeah. Mr. Arellano, did I fairly accurately describe the relationship that you have with Citibank, that it's sort of fiscal agent for the government, but the funding has already been dispersed out of government coffers and is now in a Citibank account?
Obligated and dispersed, but with oversight.
speak up?
from-
Can you just speak
Yeah,
in a little-
obligated and dispersed, but with significant oversight and guardrails from EPA.
Yeah. to make sure that it doesn't get spent outside of the legislated purpose.
That's right.
And just to be crystal clear, as we sit here right now, to this moment, you have still had zero explanation of any legal basis or fact justifying the freeze or seizure of those funds.
That's correct. In the brief that EPA provided in the lawsuit that we brought earlier this week, what's perplexing is that there are no allegations about Climate United's work. The allegations are primarily about the program itself,
Yeah,
but they terminated our agreement.
yeah. Executive Ball, you have been administering the affairs of your county for a while, both as county executive and then on the council beforehand. When a person is let go from their job, if it is mishandled, does the county, in this case, potentially face some liability?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, I'm going into my 20th year as an elected official in Howard County. And when people are let go not improperly,
Yeah.
it exposes the county. It exposes the county unnecessarily to all kinds of liability, not only financial, but reputational.
There's a way you do it, and there's a way you don't do it.
Correct.
So, and as you're doing that, you have to take the reputation of the individual employee who's being terminated into account, correct?
Correct,
You can't
Mr.
say things about them that are not true, for instance, as a part of that firing process without facing liability.
Exactly, Mr. Senator.
So when a federal official says something false about an employee, like that they are not performing adequately, which is at the heart of their work reputation, when in fact, as you pointed out, there may be years of documentation of their excellent performance, are there remedies available?
Yes, not only have they exposed the country to financial liabilities, which there will be remedies financially, but also to reputational, and there's a chilling effect to the rest of the worker, employee, and to the private sector who is now wondering, how do I want to invest? And so I think to your question as far as the remedy, I think there would not only be likely a financial remedy, but sometimes the person will then have to be reemployed, and there are just numerous impacts that are detrimental, I think, to the country, unnecessarily.
So let me ask you a hypothetical. You are the county executive.
Correct, county executive?
You have an employee who has the authority to hire and fire,
Correct.
subordinate of yours. That subordinate of yours uses that authority to fire someone in your organization, and in the context of doing so, falsely claims that the individual was engaged in subpar or inadequate performance, when in fact, their performance was at a fully competent and capable level. You find out about that, what this individual did, your subordinate to their subordinate in terms of the firing process. What would your reaction be as an employer to someone who reports to you engaging in that kind of misconduct related to a firing under your overall supervision?
Not only would I be angry, but frankly, they'd have to be held accountable. And I would recognize
Disciplinary consequences.
there will be disciplinary consequences, and I would recognize that that is a reflection of me. When people under my employ do things, there is a certain reputational impact to the entire county and to me. And so there are going to have to be consequences.
Senator Markey.
Yeah, it's quite a day, you know. The EPA announced today they're going to reconsider the endangerment finding of 2000.
Of the United States Supreme Court?
Well, there's a very famous decision, we're kind of proud of it, Massachusetts versus EPA in April of 2007. And by a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court said that the EPA had to make an endangerment finding. Now, it could decide there was no danger from climate change, from greenhouse gases. But if it found there was a danger, they had to do something about it. So actually, the Bush administration made that decision, and in the EPA, and they sent it over to the White House, and Dick Cheney told the White House, do not open that email. The finding had already been made. So, as a result, after Barack Obama won, they had to redo it in 2009, and they reached the same conclusion as the Bush administration. There was an endangerment of greenhouse gases. Now, in this case, Massachusetts was saying, you know, we have this very long, squiggly coast. It doesn't look long from the map, but when you squiggle in every one of those, it's a long, long coast. And the contention was from Massachusetts that global warming was causing a danger to our shoreline. No question about it. You know, we are just seeing massive erosion. Cod is going north. You know, they need cold water. The water's warming up dramatically. We're the second fastest warming body of water in the world after the Arctic. So, you know, obviously they found that it was an endangerment. It was in danger. So now they're going to reopen that, they say. So they'll have to go through a whole proceeding in order to try to undo that finding. And so the goal has to be, as Zeldin now takes it, it's to strip everything off of the books. So there's a story out here, March 12th, 425 AP, in what he called the most consequential day of deregulation in American history, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency announced a series of actions Wednesday to roll back landmark environmental regulations, including rules on pollution from coal-fired plants, climate change, electric vehicles. We are driving a dagger through the heart of climate change religion and ushering in Americans' golden age, EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin said in an essay in the Wall Street Journal. This is going to remove, he says, trillions of dollars in regulatory costs and hidden taxes, he said, lowering the cost of living for all Americans. So it goes on, but they're going after everything that hurts the business model of the oil, gas, and coal evidence, even though there is incontrovertible evidence of the role it plays in having 350 particles per million serve as a danger warning to the planet. So let me come back to you, Mr. We'll just call it Phil. When you got the notice that there was going to be a freeze, what did they say to you at that time?
There was no notice.
They were what?
There was no notice.
No notice whatsoever, and no evidence.
No notice, no evidence.
You see, I'm unlike Senator Whitehouse. I went to law school, and I actually learned that I didn't want to be a lawyer while I was in law school. Looked very attractive reading To Kill a Mockingbird, you know, but then when you're in there and you can see what's about to happen. So I ran for state representative in my third year of law school, and I won. And I decided I'd make laws and let other people then figure it out, what was the intent. But I'd try to make clear what the intent was. So I've never had a client, but I've written a lot of laws, including 590 laws in Congress that are on the books signed by presidents. So no one's ever had the temerity, though, to come in with no evidence and say that they were going to take one of those laws off of the books. And the obvious goal here is to act in an unconstitutional way. But it's no different really than the trumped up charges against To Kill a Mockingbird. They just trumped up charges with no real evidence. And innocent people have to suffer. So again, if we can come back to you, Professor, Hensling, if we could, just talking about this from, the evidence class at Georgetown Law School. What is taught there in terms of what has to be presented to first-year law students into a court in order to be able to bring a charge that is credible. And can you move in closer to the microphone?
Yeah. If I may, I'm going to switch it to a slightly different context.
Okay, please.
Which is the administrative law context, which I think provides the same kinds of protections.
Can you move in a little closer, please? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That provides some of the same kinds of protections that you're thinking about. So according to administrative principles that have been established across presidential administrations and have been followed by agencies for many decades, the agencies have to explain themselves. They do have to provide a reasoned explanation, and at the same time have to have some factual basis for what they do. And they can't just say stuff that's not true. So to me, it's all, and there are all these worries about criminal proceedings and so forth, but to me, the heart of all this are these actions that are effectively actions by either very high-level authorities in the government or by actual agencies like that are governed by administrative principles.
Yeah.
And so they are supposed to act in this orderly way, based on evidence, based on reason giving, and then in many cases they're required to respond to public input, and so all of this just defies that entire system. It's done without reason, it's done without evidence, it's done even probably without a person in charge who has been correctly appointed and confirmed. And so it strikes me as it's like a debris field.
It's a what?
A debris field of legal violations. And for me, what I've been looking at are
And again, if you could just
the administrative law violations.
So you're saying
It seems so very close to
the
speak that way.
Administrative Procedure Act
Yes.
requires all of these steps to have been completed.
Yes.
Or a decision can be reached in order to ensure that there is reasonableness to the decision which has been made.
Correct, yes, and that's been affirmed in case after case. And just to your point about the endangerment finding, in order to cast doubt on that endangerment finding, to withdraw it, they're going to have to go through that kind of process. They're going to have to respond to evidence in the record. They're going to have to respond to public input. And then at the end of the day, they'll have to explain themselves. And that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
In which Chevron turns the other way.
Correct,
They no longer
exactly.
enjoy the protection of their position favoring the outcome. Well, I will call this to an end. I am very grateful to each of you for coming and sharing your expertise and your experiences. This does help us inform our work going forward, and also helps provide some actual concrete, real-life human detail around the broad, vague, and generic assertions that they're just trying to find fraud, waste, and abuse. Thank you all very much.
Wow.